Hi, my name's Dave Killoran, and with me today is Chaconas. And today what we want to do is talk to you about law school admissions components. And specifically, we're going to take a look at the items on the screen that you see here, ranging from the biographical information that law schools ask about, all the way down to who is responsible for what in the process. The one thing that we're not actually going to talk about is the LSAT itself. All of you have spent a considerable amount of time preparing for the test, and so we're not going to talk about the role of the LSAT within the process. We all know it's huge, although we will talk a little bit about LSDAS and how they affect your application and your admissions chances. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll start off by talking about biographical information, and I'll actually turn the mic over to Anne and let her talk a little bit about that. Anne?
Thanks, Dave, and hello, everybody. I'm glad to be able to be talking to you today about the components of the law school application. So as Dave said, we're going to start with the biographical information. Biographical information can essentially be broken down into two broad categories. The first is just your resume questions, and the second is actually the conduct questions. And we'll talk about conduct questions on their own because they do have a specific set of requirements that need to be met. And so we'll deal with those individually. As far as the resume questions go, it's essentially the questions that you're asked every day on forms when you're applying for a job, your educational history, your professional history, nothing big there. Name, social security number, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing, though, that you have to worry about with the resume questions is that they have to match everything else in your application. They have to match your actual resume. They have to match what you registered to take the LSAT with. They have to match what the Social Security Department has. Everything has to match. So that's the biggest thing to really remember about the resume questions. Now, the conduct questions are a completely different and separate entity, and you actually have to treat them as something separate. They come in three broad definitions. You've got your academic questions, your criminal behavioral questions, and your military questions. And I'd like to actually read you a couple of examples of how these questions look so that you know exactly what you're dealing with. As far as an academic kind of question, you would probably be asked something to the effect of, have you ever been placed on academic probation or been required to withdraw from any school for academic reasons? As far as anything criminal would go, you might be asked something to the effect of, have you ever, either as an adult or juvenile, been charged with or convicted of any crime or charged with or found to have committed any offense, or are any such charges pending? And as a military question, you might be asked, if you have ever served on full-time military active duty, was your discharge under conditions other than honorable? So what you'll notice right away is that all of these have to do with negative things. That's what they all want to know. And the biggest thing here is disclose, disclose, disclose. You want to be as truthful as possible. You don't want to fudge the truth, even in the slightest bit. And the second thing that you need to be aware of, aside from being as disclosure friendly as possible, is that these are the questions that will eventually lead to addendums. And that's what we're going to talk about a little later on in this session.
And let me just add in a little thought to that, the point that you made about disclosure, because sometimes with certain students, you get down to these questions on your application and you think to yourself, well, maybe I don't really need to put all that information out there. And it's kind of negative, so maybe I can kind of like play the edges and get past. And as Anne said, don't do it. It's certainly an attractive idea, but the problem that you run into is that, first off, you're lying. And that's a bad thing, in and of itself. But secondly, if they find out, they literally have the power to throw you out of law school. They can withdraw your acceptance. If you're in law school, they can simply ask you to leave at that point. Even all the way down, if you're an attorney, they can then put you under sanctions. And so you really don't want to mess around with this. You would be amazed by how long this information will follow you. They don't throw this out when they're done and they've actually accepted you. They keep all of this information. So ultimately, if you decide that you're going to kind of play around with your answer a little bit, you're putting yourself at risk all the way down for the entire career that you're trying to get into here. So I realize that some things really you don't want them to come out, but you have to if they ask about it. Now, Also, you can look at the letter of the question. Some questions ask you whether or not you've been convicted. Some ask you whether or not you've been charged or convicted. And so you can look very carefully at what they're saying and make a determination. If you were charged with something but not convicted and they don't ask for what you were charged for, then you don't have to disclose that. But if they do ask for something, whether or not you were arrested or charged, then you're going to have to actually admit that if that's the case. So there's nothing wrong with actually adhering to exactly what they say. But if they've asked you for something, you have to actually respond to it. So, and as with everything, when you go ahead and you finally submit your application, you put a certifying statement on there that says that, yes, indeed, I've gone ahead and I've told you the truth. And one thing that certain applications will say, I'm looking at the NYU one here, it says that I understand that omission or misrepresentation may be the basis for denial of admission, rescinding of an offer admission, dismissal from the law school, or revocation of the NYU law degree. All right, that's pretty brutal. All of a sudden, it's 10 years down the road. It turns out that you lied about something. Here's NYU knocking at your door saying, by the way, that degree that you have from us, you can kiss that goodbye. So we don't want to overemphasize the importance of this, but we certainly want you to understand that this is something that you cannot play games with.